Hello gentlemen, I am Vitold, and in this video we're going through with a comparison of two bikes that I'm asked about much more often than I would ever expect. There is a lot of interest in Yamaha Tracer 9 and for good reasons. I'll be referring in this video to a Tracer 9 in a GT version, as that's what I rode and it feels like a pretty desired and a common choice. Somehow, however, there's almost equally many hearts being moved by what another Japanese manufacturer has to offer, a Kawasaki Versys 1000 here in an SE version, so the top of the line and also a popular choice. So we will go through a set of separate categories in which I'll tell you very openly which out of the two is, I think, better. And I can do so as I do not own a Versys 1000 and I do not own a Tracer, so I've got no "my mom is the best" syndrome, and I may give you an unbiased perspective based on my own experiences with those bikes. Now, each category has a winner, but the sheer number of wins does not mean that a given bike is better or worse. This always depends on you, your preferences, your riding style, and where you are riding. Within the categories, yes, that's fine, but overall, that's a bigger picture. So instead, in the end, I'll tell you which out of the two I would choose myself and why. That would be my decision. Let's get into it, starting off with the first category. So engine and performance. This is interesting, as one might think that Tracer 9, being with the number 9 in its name, is not a match for a Versys 1000, and well, let's look at the numbers. Versys 1000 has a 4-cylinder engine with 1043 cubic centimeters of displacement, so it's above 1 liter indeed. Now Tracer 9 has a 3-cylinder engine with 890 cubic centimeters. So yes, it is smaller and with one fewer cylinder. But what matters more is power, which is almost identical, with Versys 1000 bringing 120 horsepower to the table and Tracer coming with 119 horsepower, just one less. So basically when we say they're the same. Torque numbers are where more of a difference is present, and Versys has more at 102 Nm of torque against Tracer's 92 Nm. Still, it's less than 10 Nm of difference, so not mind-blowing. And already here it's worth mentioning that the Versys 1000 is visibly heavier on paper, so that could balance things out even more. But what about how they feel? Tracer feels more explosive than a Versys 1000, but I would expect them to be pretty closely matched in terms of acceleration times. Still, an overall impression would be that you might expect more from a Versys 1000, while Tracer can positively surprise with its engine's willingness to push and push and push. Tracer feels the best in the second half of its RPM range, and if you keep it there, it along with yourself should be happy. Versys is pulling a little bit better from the bottom, and that's where you might appreciate more displacement, but still, it's not that big of a difference, if any, in fact. Considering both of these performance-wise, Tracer does feel quicker and more fun in terms of engine to me. Aside from that, Versys vibrates like crazy above 5000 RPM when riding steady, while Tracer vibrates like crazy when you set off and start going from a standstill when you release the clutch. I believe that this is exactly more of a clutch thing, but I was noticing it every time, thinking that the bike was about to stall. So none of those is perfect. Clutch in a Tracer grabs pretty late, and that needs some getting used to. Versys, on the other hand, gets way too hot when at the standstill and also when riding slowly, and that was quite frustrating for me. Tracer has got no heat management issues, so mainly because of the excitement generated, I'm giving the win here to the Tracer 9, as it feels as if it was happier with its engine. Versys feels limited by the RPM that Kawasaki allowed it to use. This makes the gears feel unusually short for a 4-cylinder bike, while there is not many benefits in return, if any, at all. The second category is handling, and man, with two great bikes we've got here when it comes to slow speed maneuvers. Both of these are awesome in this area, with Versys being amazingly stable, balanced and precise right from the start, which makes it go through traffic effortlessly. Super surprising for such a hippo on wheels. Tracer is not as stable, but it turns super easily, so changing directions is like with a flick of a switch, and it feels light and fun to change directions. Both are great for city riding and I do appreciate that a lot. At higher speeds, Tracer continues to positively impress, being able to switch lanes immediately and turning from the right to the left and back super quickly and nicely. It's really fun to ride, but you've got to be careful in order to not get too excited, as it feels like this bike has almost no limits, and that leads to suddenly finding those limits. All that eagerness results also in being quite sensitive, and that requires a lot of focus on your side, but it's overall really nice. Versys 1000 isn't that impressive when speeds race and time comes to start leaning left and right to turn, as it really seems not to enjoy that, and it fights you with all it's got to keep going straight instead. When you're in a turn at a certain lean angle and add throttle, the bike straightens up a lot. When you use a brake, the same thing happens, so it's a constant battle of chickens and you've got to keep slapping the Versys in the head so that it follows you. For a twisty road, do take a Tracer instead. For a highway, you might want to take a Versys, which is less sensitive and more stable. That helps. Yeah, if all the roads were straight, the Versys could ride on its own. Here's a win for the Tracer, as it's never disappointing, while the Versys 1000 has a clear weak spot here. In terms of suspension, both bikes come with electronic adjustment, which is pretty limited, and you do not have that many options to choose from. System on the Versys 1000 gives you more options, and also differences between the modes are clearly visible, while in a Tracer they are not so much. Tracer is always significantly stiffer, and in comparison to the Versys, more bouncy. It handles potholes okay, but Versys does it better, does it smoother, and it stays more composed when doing so. Suspension travel of a Tracer is also smaller at 13 centimeters in the front and 13.7 in the rear, while Versys has 15 centimeters in the front and in the rear. So it's got more to work with. In the rear it may get a little bit floaty, I mean Versys, when riding over bumps in turns, but it's not terrible, and thanks to having more options and being able to give you a more comfortable ride than a Tracer in the softest setting, the Versys wins here. Moving on to the next category, so seat and position comfort. I'll start with the Versys, which has a seat at 84 centimeters with no adjustment possibility, so you cannot raise it, you can lower it. I don't particularly like that seat, it is too narrow in the front, while the sitting position is upright with a slight lean, but very little lean forward. So there's not that much support from the seat there, and instead you may be crushing your manliness a little bit sometimes even more than a little bit. The knee angle is fine for me at 183 centimeters tall or 6 feet tall. Overall, it is an okay place to be in. And now I can tell you that on the Tracer 9, I did not feel very comfortable because of a terribly hard seat with hard edges that would hurt my legs when it would stop. The seat is low because it's at only 81 centimeters, but it can be raised to 82.5 centimeters, yet its shape forces you to reach far out with your legs to the sides, and in the end you feel like it's not that easy to reach the ground. That's very weird in this case. Foot pegs are also pretty high, and so the gear and brake levers are installed at an angle that, in the case of a brake lever, it would make it very hard and to me uncomfortable to reach with my foot. That didn't inspire much confidence. You can adjust them, but yeah, still. Anyway, position is close to squatting. Not the best overall, or at least not for such a giant as myself. Maybe if you're 140 centimeters tall, you won't have those issues, but I was bothered by them. This makes Versys 1000 take a win with a lot of margin and advantage over the Tracer, and at the same time it makes it a more comfortable motorcycle to ride, especially for long. If I could, I would mount my electric office chair on top of either, and that would make them the most comfortable bikes in the world. Anyhow, wind protection is the next category here, and the Versys 1000 is not the best here, since the faster you go, the more shaky the experience for your head. Your visor will be covered in insects, if there are any insects where you live. On the Tracer, the experience is even more shaky, with a crazy amount of turbulences behind that stock windshield. Now, this thing is better in your rubbish bin than on a bike, I can tell you that. Throw it out and just get something decent that will do the job properly. Then there's a matter of height adjustment that both bikes have, and while Versys 1000 requires you to stop and operate two knobs with two hands at the same time, on a Tracer you may adjust the height easily and with just one hand, which is an advantage. It's a much better solution, but you won't need it if you don't replace the windshield, as this stock monster is best moved out of the way as soon as possible. I will keep saying that. A win for the Versys 1000, but it shouldn't really be considered a very much deserved victory, but at least you can live with that bike. What about the brakes? Tracer does a good job here with both brakes being strong and pretty easy to dose. Note that Corning ABS is available from 2021 in this bike. Versys 1000 has a fairly weak front brake, and I was initially able to easily squeeze the lever to the point of it coming against the grip, which is unacceptable. I later moved the whole lever away as this had been a ridiculous situation. Still, the rear brake isn't doing that much on its own, so this is a place for a big and quick improvement on Kawasaki's side, and I hope that they will listen. This platform, I think, has a lot of potential, and there are fairly few easy improvements to make this Versys amazing. Still, it's a win for the Tracer. The next point is about drivetrain, and since both bikes use chain drive, it's a quick one, as we've got a draw here. No winner. So then fuel tanks. Here Versys has more to offer with its 21-liter tank against Tracer's 18.7 liters. So yeah, it's a win for the Versys here. Moving on to the next category, in weight. Here, both on paper and in real life, one bike feels clearly lighter in any situation, and that's a Tracer with its 220 kilograms of weight with fuel against 257 kilograms for Versys 1000 SE with that additional equipment. A Versys 1000 standard tips the scale at 253 kilograms, so still it's over 30 kilograms more than a Tracer, and once again I can feel that. Tracer 9 is a smaller bike, and it comes with certain advantages but also some disadvantages that I've mentioned, like for example the ones regarding comfort. Still, here it's a win for the Tracer 9, no questions asked, I think. Tech is the next point of this comparison, and these bikes aren't the top ones when it comes to technological advancement, but it's also not like they're missing a lot of significant equipment, I think. Both can have a quick shifter, which in both is also far from being top of the top. They both can have Corning front LED lights, heated grips, riding modes, and no keyless ignition, unfortunately. Tracer can be equipped with a heated seat, which is cool. Yeah, almost literally cool, as it costs an insane amount of money, but it's there. It can be there. Then we've got the displays, and Kawasaki went with a nice old school analog ref counter and a small and not very impressive digital screen next to it, like in BMW's 10 years before. But it works, and I personally like seeing the physical needle being alive. Tracer has two small screens overloaded with numbers and some dividers, whatever those things are. All this looks like two big scary eyes of some fly or a mosquito looking at you at all times. I think that Kawasaki has done it better. Other than some mentioned differences, they are very similar in terms of what you can have them equipped with, so it's not that obvious to choose a winner here. The strange part is that none of them can have a tire pressure monitoring system, unless in the case of Yamaha you buy it from Yamaha as an accessory. But you can do it, it's worth I think any kind of money, and the only downside is that the gauge has to be installed somewhere on the bike as a separate unit. But they've given you an option just like the heated seat, so I'm giving the win to Tracer. There's also a newer GT Plus version that is more advanced with some new systems on board, and this would make me give the win to the Tracer 9 family as a whole. Anyway, comparing exhaust sound, Tracer sounds similarly to a small 4-cylinder engines in popular motorcycles, so it's nothing super special, but Versys 1000 sounds super serious at idle. That is its, I think, very strong point and definitely exciting part, and so it wins here thanks to being able to shake the ground with ease, just with sound. It makes the bike itself appear as more powerful and more serious. And now about the design, which is a matter of taste, and I do like Tracer much more when looking at them both. It looks more modern to me, it looks more aggressive and with more exciting details. The proportions make it appear more sleek, while the Versys is looking like a Versys, let's put it this way. If you'd like to hear my full opinion, which I don't think I should be giving here, check my full honest review of a Versys that is linked in the description. Same about the Tracer 9, which is only one of its lamps working on a daily basis that I actually this is something to consider. It would be annoying me very much. Still, to me, Tracer 9 looks way better and it does secure a win. And so the time has come for the price and value for money category. Base versions of these bikes, so Tracer 9 and the Versys 1000 standard, are not far from each other, as Versys is 10% more expensive than the Tracer 9. But I feel that you somehow get a more serious bike for that, which at the same time is at the top of the lineup with only a smaller brother in the form of a Versys 650 there. Tracer is considered a mid-ranged, mid-positioned motorcycle, so in fact it might be considered being in a class below the Versys. But taking a look at versions that come with top equipment and that you might actually be a little bit more interested in, at least some of you guys, so the Versys 1000 SE and Tracer 9 GT, not the GT Plus yet, Versys becomes 25% more expensive, and I would struggle to say that it's a better value for money proposition, as I don't think it is. Hypothetically, including a Tracer 9 GT Plus here, that's way more expensive than the GT, because 14% more expensive. Then we've got the top version of a Versys, so the SE, being still 10% more expensive than the Tracer 9 GT Plus. To me, that would be something that I would not accept to swallow. Tracer 9 gives us a better price, and I think that it also gives us, in those circumstances, better value for money anyway. So it's a winner. The last category to compare them in is the X Factor. Here I feel that we generally have a lot of fun when riding Tracer 9. It's because of its lively engine, because of its great handling, and that all is put against Versys' appearance of a serious motorcycle with an engine sounding like a most powerful thing on earth. To me, Tracer 9 is more fun generally, and so it collects the X Factor award, winning in this particular category. In the end, we've got Tracer 9 winning in the engine and performance, handling, weight, brakes, tech, design, price and value for money, and the X Factor. Now, Versys 1000 wins in suspension, seat and position comfort, wind protection, fuel tank, and sound. In terms of drivetrain, they are the same. So which one would I choose myself and why? This largely depends if I would be planning long trips, which I would prefer to take the Versys on due to better comfort, due to better wind protection, more stability, and also a feeling of a more serious, more stable, also at the same time bike overall. For city riding, for some short, quick rides, and just fooling around, I would prefer the Tracer. But Tracer simply feels too cramped for me at my huge size. I like its looks, so most likely I would work on changing the seat, and I would get something taller maybe. Maybe then also I would be raising the handlebar at the same time, if that's possible, and I would be probably installing a windshield that works to be able to live with it. Now, the tipping point would be the design, I think, and also the fact that Versys 1000 doesn't like turning very much at speeds, and the amount of money that Kawasaki charges for the SE version is a territory of fully loaded Triumph Tiger 1200, close to BMW R1250 GS, to KTM 1290 Super Adventure and Ducati Multistrada, which, well, that's in my other comparisons. But here I am staying with the Tracer 9, and if you would like to learn more about it in my full honest review, head to the link in the description, and see you there as well. If you would like to do the same with the Versys, that's another video right there as well. See you!